Hello, I'm Becca from Informa Connect Life Sciences, working on the MedTech Summit, and I'm joined here today by Gert from Qserve, James Whitehead from AstraZeneca, Annabelle Bruydonckx, and Vladimir Murovec from Simmons and Simmons. Today we'll be discussing the 1 year of the EU MDR delay and what this means for industry. So firstly, Gert, could you kind of outline what's been happening in the last 2 weeks with the delay?
So in the last 2 weeks, there have been a lot of debates about getting this postponement, and of course people were already happy with the first signs when the European Commission had published their proposal. The first debates we saw in the industry already stopping their MDR projects just because the fact that there could have been a delay. Luckily now that is in place. And we have seen a lot of people starting to acquire what the actual deal is, what the effect is. And of course, we have to realize there that it's only the date of application, well, only the date of application that's being delayed. The end goal, when a manufacturer needs to be in compliance, is still depending on the end of the grace period or the end of their current certificate. So as such, a lot of the projects that currently get on hold or where funding is dropped will have to be reactivated soon in order to meet the final deadlines. But for the short period, this is very great news because everyone can focus their attention on COVID products and on supporting the most urgent devices onto the market at this stage.
Great. And it all happened very quickly. Annabelle, from a legal point of view, is it normal for a delay of this kind to be approved so quickly through Parliament?
Well, it followed the normal procedure, but it went very quickly. When we see the corrigendum number 2 or the one before, it took much more time. So if we see here the date, I think the proposal was adopted on 3rd of April. Then we had the vote by the Parliament on the 17th and a Council decision on the 22nd, and then very quickly the publication on the 24th with the direct entry into force. So this is all very quickly, yeah. But it was required by this situation. I don't know if...
Great. And with this extra year on the clock, James, how do you think industry should be using this extra year?
I think it's a time to pilot what you look to implement in a month's time, or had to implement in a month's time. The way that my group are looking at this is we're going to go live with EU MDR as soon as we can for our products. You have the ability to transition over the next year. We'll go as soon as we can, and then use it to learn, to tweak our processes, specifically around the new elements of EU MDR that perhaps weren't in MDD, but does give us the, I guess, the sandbox ability to test those out.
And Vladimir, is there anything you would add to that about how industry should be using their year?
What we see at the moment is we're getting a lot of queries from our medical device clients on supply of COVID-19 related products, and I think they're really focusing their efforts on trying to deliver those products or having them certified either in the EU or via external non-EU laboratories or notified bodies, and trying to find a way to get them inside the EU to fight against COVID-19. So that there's really that kind of questions comes up more and more, and it's understandable that they don't have the time at the moment to seek MDR compliance for their other products as they are busy fighting COVID-19, which is the reason why the proposal and the regulation was adopted.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that it brings any sort of new opportunities for industry, having the extra time?
Overall, yes, definitely. Of course, they'll have 1 more year to focus on getting their procedures ready, on preparing agreements. Well, when we review agreements, we realize how, especially distribution agreements, how exhausting and long that process can be when you have to involve a group of companies and the business as well. So that will definitely give them more time to focus on coronavirus issues, and then postpone MDR compliance for at least a few weeks. Yeah.
Gert, is there anything that you'd add to that?
Yeah, well, yes, of course. I guess one of the key contributors of this new legislative change is the derogation clauses that have been widened. The fact that we have a delay on the MDR means that also national law, national derogations do not come to a halt by the 26th of May, but can just continue as the underlying legislation is not changing. at least not essentially. Secondly, also then this European-wide derogation clause that's being added here, similar to what previously was in the recommendation for the PPE, will allow also for some of these new novel products that haven't had the full assessment but have been authorized, have been cleared to go by a national authority, to be more widely available in Europe for all countries covering this crisis. That's going to be one of the major advantages, I would say, directly feelable to patients and to people working in the hospital. Secondly, the fact that a lot of products, class 1 products, are needed at this moment for the interventions, the masks and so on. Many of them would otherwise have been removed from the market because manufacturers were either not ready or not willing to invest in going into the MDR. And so by the fact that they can just continue without any changes to continue to deliver based on their old market entry points, that certainly gives also the redemption, the lift of problems that we are in need of.
Yeah, and that's also the case for products that were excluded from the MDR. When you think about probiotics, for example, that are not, of course, necessarily a key priority for the fight on coronavirus, but still offer these manufacturers one more year to be compliant.
And we've talked a lot about sort of date of application changing, but will any other dates, we saw UDEMED date changed earlier this year. Do you think that date will also be changed to bring everything in line, or do you think that will still launch with the IVDR in the year after?
I think it will stay. I think the tech means that they've invested in that, and I think that they already needed that time. I think if they're not ready by IVDR date, then, well, they've still got plenty of time to work through this. We saw this with vigilance. We've seen this with the MDLM for literature. These sort of teething problems are often there with IT, but I would expect them to keep those dates because we need that. That was one of the reasons I think the delay had to happen, because UDEMED wasn't ready, because there was so much implementation pieces that weren't there. And I think the European Commission may have pushed this through quicker because they had a lot of stake. They had some skin in the game. The EMA medicines, but the European Commission are accountable for this. So, from my perspective, UDEMED has to go live, and and we should hold them to account if it's not.
I would agree with James on that end, and I think one more thing that we should realize here. One of the debates in the last few weeks was to get some of the modules of UDEMED, even though they were not completed, to go live. And this has always been the Commission's viewpoint, but there were some legal hurdles. For instance, the economic operator registration. The fact that we now have a year more, meaning 13 months to just have a proper plan in place that, although by May 2022, UDEMED might be ready, by May next year, UDEMED might be partially ready in such a way that, especially this registrations and the transparency on certificates and so on and so on, some of these modules potentially could be made available from the new date of application of the MDR. And that would really, on the one hand, mean a lot in terms of visibility for everyone what's happening. On the other hand, also, as Vladimir was saying, it has been very difficult to persuade people in the distribution chain to come to all the contractual agreements. And I guess if there is a clear deadline on UDEMED when all of them as participants should register, that gives the parties negotiating really a deadline, and much stronger discussion can happen to make that happen in a timely fashion.
And I think before the COVID pandemic, people were calling for a delay because of the issues with not enough notified bodies and needing more time for clinical studies. Do you think this delay would have happened without COVID, or the pandemic is the real reason it was pushed through? No.
Pandemic pushed it through.
Pandemic, yeah, it wouldn't have happened.
You gave a good reason to push it through. There was a valid reason. The pandemic was a justification. Up until this point, the only justification for the delay was we weren't ready, and that doesn't cut it in law. This for it. If you don't mind, I have a question for everyone around this with COVID-19. Someone mentioned we've got a lot more individuals producing medical devices. So you take Dyson, their ventilator. You've got companies now that are making medical devices. Does that mean in 12 months' time, we're going to have this huge influx of new medical device companies, therefore more emphasis on notified bodies to approve these devices made? What do the panel think around those that weren't traditional device companies, but now they are? What's going to happen with them?
What we see is that some of them are authorized through national derogation procedures, and in that case you have two options. Either in parallel the manufacturer seeks CE certification, either by self-certification or with notified body, or and that can happen, for example, in Belgium, the manufacturer is simply making available or placing on the market the device without a CE marking and does not make the promise that the device will be CE marked. And in that second case, that product is on the market for a limited period of time, but will not stay there after the pandemic. At least that's my assumption.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and especially the ones that have, some companies even have started to say, well, we will only market this material however much need there is if we get a CE mark, to also put pressure on the whole CE marking process and get the notified body to confirm to rapid tests, rapid reviews, and so on and so on. And I guess those would be the companies that are actually in there to stay. They are building a quality system. They're making the true assessment of what it is to be a medical device company. And some of them are quite new. What I see as well is that there's quite some innovation at this moment from technologies that were never considering to be used as a medical device. And all of a sudden, now we discover that there's features that might actually help in one way or another, either in this urgent phase or in a later phase of the pandemic, getting back to the new normal. And so some of them really would see this as a jump ship into the device industry, which they would never have considered had there not been such a pandemic and an urgent need for their new technology.
And James, you mentioned there about sort of the pressure then on notified bodies of having these new products to be looking at as well. There was also sort of a fear of bottleneck if it wasn't a delay. Do you think we're just pushing that by a year, or is there a chance to prevent a bottleneck for 2021?
I think there's an opportunity to prevent a bottleneck with planning. I think with notified bodies now, they've gone through their certification, we've got them, and it's up for them to now say, right, these are our slots of time. These are the number of people, companies that we can work with. And then they need to be pragmatic with what they can get done. So there shouldn't be a bottleneck if we have the right planning, but that's the if. The pandemic, who knows how long that will last. For certain devices, you can't do a remote certification. It needs to be on site in some cases. So it really comes down to, and that's the same with notified bodies certifying those. So I think we can prevent a bottleneck if we're pragmatic, but that would require a lot of people coming to the table and doing some sort of like army style planning, very, very regimented.
Yeah, so but one more thing needs to happen in that sense to put a little bit more focus on that. As notified bodies are prohibited to do initial audits for the MDR, that's of course one of the bottlenecks. But it also means that there's now a split between those notified bodies that are in the process of being designation and already have had their first joint assessment, and the ones that still were in early phases of scheduling and planning and didn't have their joint audit yet. I would say that the authorities, the joint authorities, will need to find a way around it by having virtual audits also for initial audits, maybe with the national authority on site, so kind of a hybrid option, because otherwise there would be a huge delay for those that just are late in the game, which would be a waste, because we need all of these notified bodies with their rightful scope to be designated as soon as possible. And the positive news, of course, is that last week one notified body was finalized in their designation, MDC, as you all know. There's one more in the pipeline in this very final phase, but hopefully more can continue in more pragmatic ways to get the designations in place. The good thing about the the people from notified body not traveling and doing all the audits and so on, is that many manufacturers have noticed that their reviewers, their auditors, are so much easier to reach. Reviews and technical debates can happen in much shorter timeframes than before. So as such, also, even though everyone's struggling to work from home, the timelines of some MDR projects are really being shortened by the fact that more people are available, both inside the company as well as from notified body and external support companies.
That's an excellent point. Do you think that post-pandemic things will still happen remotely, having people seen it can work, or do you think we're going to go back to having all audits done on site?
I would certainly think that there will be some elements for remote audits, especially follow-up and so on and so on. On the other hand, as it is with your friends at this moment, you can have a virtual interaction with them and drink a glass of wine and chat via video link and so on and so on. You can do that this week and next month and so on. After a while, you need to be in touch with each other. You need to sit together. And so I guess some level of see it yourself, being close to other people, having that facility in your minds as an auditor is going to be crucial. But there will certainly be more room for virtual follow-ups and so on in between moments, surveillance audits perhaps, especially if it's a remote company and it's the only company in that certain country that a notified body is auditing, so they cannot combine it with a number of other companies. I guess we'll see an increase in the use of virtual techniques for these type of audits and other meetings.
And Annabelle and Vladimir, are you getting any more questions from your clients about the EU MDR and delay and what it means to them, or is it all just kind of things we've had about so far?
Well, we got a lot at the start when they saw the proposal, because of course there you have the question about the legislative process, and just the proposal was, oh, okay, it's delayed. So then we had to explain that it was very likely to be delayed, but not yet, that there was a legislative process to be followed. No, indeed, we get questions. That's why we just prepare a reading grid just to explain a little what it is about, this postponement. But at the moment, I must say the most of our questions are really COVID related, because that's where the priority of our clients is at the moment.
And on derogations as well.
And on the regulation, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe there you can say a word, but indeed, derogations, it's something we have a lot.
For PPE as well, but focusing on devices, how the procedure works and how it fits in with the new European derogation. Yeah, that's the kind of questions we get at the moment.
And could you expand a little bit more on that, about how that is working in Europe?
On the national derogation procedure, well, it comes from the directive, but it's still, it's on a country-by-country basis. How it works in Belgium, well, it's pretty straightforward. So manufacturers have a form that they have to fill in, trying to provide as many details as possible to the authorities to try and show that even though the device isn't certified for the time being, they are getting there, or they are at least meeting the essential requirements or a standard of similar sort, for the authorities to make an assessment on whether the device can be safely placed on the local market. And then, as I said, sometimes that comes with an undertaking to seek C certification in parallel, or sometimes the device is just going to be placed on the market for a couple of weeks or months, and in that case, they don't seek C marking. So it really depends on the product and what the file looks like before the authorities. And I also know that the application form is a work in progress. So it's been published a few weeks ago. It's been updated for COVID-19 related questions, and it might still change, just like the entire legislative, or at least the entire legislation at the moment in Europe. As lawyers, it's sometimes funny that we have to render advice on medical device legislation that changes day after day, because some kind of products suddenly have to pass through certain distribution channels that are restricted, for example, only through pharmacies for certain tests, or only upon prescription for other types of medical devices. And so it's we have to follow that as well.
Great. And so talking about separate countries, people have been asking as well about how Brexit will be affected by the EU MDR delay. Does anyone on the panel have any thoughts or concerns with that?
I hope it stops it. No, I think it's put it on the back burner for my planning anyway. We focused on COVID-19 and we're not really seeing a lot coming out of the government around what will happen. But clearly we've been planning that it would happen. So in my case, we've had to make sure we've got authorised representatives ready for when Brexit does go live. But I'm hoping that the pandemic may indicate, it's better to stay together, but we'll see. I live in hope.
Yeah, I think that's all we can do, hope. On the other hand, the European Commission last week, also after a series of meetings a whole week, was not very positive in the way they have described the interactions. Earlier on, they provided suggestion to have a delay to the UK, which was not followed up on and agreed with the UK. So I guess the chances of success, well, as we saw with this delay last minute, a lot of things can happen. So this might still happen in the next weeks until this decision moment is there. But I guess everyone should be preparing, as James is doing, for the worst case, what happens if the Brexit is not happening. But same also with the Swixit and the Turksit, where the MRA with Switzerland is not fully signed yet. The AKA with Turkey is far from ready to include the MDR. So the problem is much broader than only the Brexit elements. What we do see is that UK is leading, as always, its own life in a sense, in a positive way. They've always been helping the EU to write down guidance in early phases. What you can see is they still do that. They wrote a lot of guidance on minimum requirements of products under the special approval routes. And I guess most of them, although not officially approved in the rest of EU, it's going to be very helpful to follow the guidance of the UK, even if you use the national derogation in other countries. So as such, they still lead with guidance in that sense, and I hope that we find a way to keep them on board in the rest of EU, as working together in times of pressure is always better. There is one question that nobody has put on the table yet, but it's relating to these national laws, and the question that I do get a lot from both manufacturers as well as notified bodies, apparently being uncertain whether or not the delay in the MDR will allow now sufficient time to restore the national laws based on MDD and AIMD, so that they can continue to issue MDD and AIMD certificates for another year. That would also allow significant changes that have been put on the back burner because of Article 120 of the MDR to now continue, leading to the new issue of changed certificates. And the majority of notified bodies at this moment are kind of stalling, waiting for guidance on whether or not, with or without changed national laws based on the MDD, they can go ahead. And so that would be really added value if clarity could be found. And perhaps Annabelle and Vladimir would have some thoughts on that, or have already spoken to authorities or other opinion leaders on that.
We haven't been discussing, I mean, unless I'm mistaken, we are often in contact, and certainly with the Belgian authorities. We haven't been discussing the national legislation at the moment, but unless I'm mistaken, in Belgium at least, we hadn't changed the law yet. So I would expect that we don't need, and I'm turning also to Vladimir because we offer brainstorm together, but I wouldn't think we need something, if I speak about Belgium only, to change something at this point in time in the Belgian legislation.
No, all we have is a draft decree. So obviously all certificates are still valid. Now it's also up to notified bodies. I know that many notified bodies later at the end of last year decided to stop certifying new products under the directive. Now with the postponement, will this position change? I think under national laws, as long as the laws implementing the MDR For example, as regards sanctions, as long as these laws are not passed, there's no reason why the directives couldn't keep being implemented through existing national laws. And at least it's the case in Belgium, yes.
And I guess in many countries, because we haven't seen many laws, everyone was late with the local legislation. So I haven't seen many laws being published in other countries. So I would think that the existing legislation in most of them, and I'm not speaking for all countries, but in most countries, the existing legislation shouldn't have been changed at the moment. And so they just keep valid and still applicable.
Yeah,
there may be some countries that are considered. Yeah.
So last time we looked, we had Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Czech Republic, another Eastern European country. All of them had draft laws more or less advanced before national parliaments, but they weren't voted yet. No.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Is there any other issues that you think or unanswered questions that we have because of the EU MDR move?
I do get a lot of questions about the PMS plans and PMCF plans that people were putting in place in order to comply with the grace period requirements, Article 120.3. And many seem to think that even if they have started PMS plans and PMCF plans, they've started the implementation, that they can just put them on hold. And I guess it's fair to warn that many notified bodies have already said that if they see anything like that, there will be some severe consequences of that. If PMS plans are made, PMCF plans are made, even with the year delay, that work of generating this real world data continues to be relevant. And so a notified body will presume that you continue as scheduled and planned, and that goes also for any other promises basically that you have been making.
Yeah, and I think that to stop that would be cynical. I think, especially on surveillance of safety and performance, to pause it is not, for me, it's not in the ethos of this regulation. We should be putting patients first, and that means if you've got the surveillance system ready, you should be doing your surveillance. And that's the way that my group are taking it. As soon as we can, we're doing full surveillance in line with the EU MDR. The sooner the better, because it makes our technical file stronger, it makes our position stronger, we know more about our device. So yeah, I think it's very cynical to pause.
Yeah, well, in some cases you have to pause if you're running a clinical trial and access to patients, or patients are not coming back into the hospital for follow-up.
Of course.
That might be delays. You might not be welcome in the hospital for follow-up visits and so on and so on. So in certain cases, yes, you will have to delay, postpone, or even face the consequence of losing some patients to follow-up. But in the majority of cases and registries and so on and so on and so on, life just continues.
Yeah, you adapt, but yeah, I think you have to adapt to it, and that's what we've been suggesting around our post-market clinical follow-up plan is you adapt it. But we've asked all of our teams not to stop. But I think the pause is the right word. Pause, think about it, and then re-engage once you've actually worked through it. And I think that's one of the benefits of EU MDR being delayed, is it gives people time to think a bit more. What's the best system? What's the best way of doing this? Not just industry though, but also the Commission. We're seeing some more Implementation Act documents coming out. It gives them plenty of time to release them, and then for us to digest them.
So with the EU MDR delay, it's brought up some new questions about whether the EU IVDR should have also been delayed, especially as in vitro diagnostic products are being used daily at the moment with the fight for COVID. What are the panel's thoughts about whether that should have been delayed now, and do we think it will be delayed in the future? I'll start with Annabelle. What are your thoughts?
Well, should have been delayed or not, I think it may be wrong, but it was not on. Yeah, it's been discussed, but it's decided not to do so. I think I'm afraid of the fact that indeed we have no more time for MDR. But I was hoping that because, okay, we were late for MDR, but I was thinking, okay, no, we're gonna take more, we're gonna have the time to look at IVDR. Now we have one more year for MDR, and I'm afraid that, okay, we're gonna focus all efforts on MDR compliance, and IVDR will be afterwards, and we will not have enough time for IVDR. So maybe, yes, it should have been, but maybe it will be later, because maybe we will face the same situation that we will not be able to meet the deadline for IVDRs, because I think there remain a lot of things to be done, much more for IVDR for MDR. So yes, I mean, it's difficult to answer, and I have no crystal ball to see whether it will be postponed in the future or not. But yeah, it's not being changed at the moment. I don't know what the others are thinking about that.
I guess there's a double morale in this case. If you look at the rationales from the tripartite saying, why do we issue this delay for the MDR? There seems to be two arguments. One is to release pressure off the market and allow products to freely flow into the hospitals that we need at this stage. And the second one is to allow industry and other parties a little bit more time to implement MDR, because everyone is focusing on COVID and so on. And the first argument would not be valid for the IVD, because most of the products that we use are of the risk classification that manufacturers without any notified body can just place them on the market, well, just after meeting the essential requirements and so on, of course. So in that sense, there's no need for a delay to keep the critical products and even the new ones that are being developed at this moment for COVID testing and so on, because it's in the hands of manufacturers and the authorities, basically. On the other hand, the industry itself is not ready, is not preparing, is now focusing on other things, as Annabelle already said. But more clearly, also the majority of notified bodies applying for IVDR, they haven't had yet their joint audit. And so although we hope that still at this moment we only have 3, and one of them after Brexit might be kind of double, so we have 2 bodies that are doing the work. Currently we have 22, so quite a lot still need to go through the process, and they're in that very early stage. And so I guess a delay would be nice, but if we don't get a delay, then at least a solution to get these designations going as soon as possible, that would be helpful to at least meet some of the deadlines.
James, anything you'd add to that?
I think industry always wants more time. I sort of feel that we need to keep the timeline for people to take it seriously. You know, everyone's going to want another year. Many cases from a budget project perspective, people work year to 2 year increments. So if you give them 3 years, they won't look at this for another year. You know, from a budget perspective, companies are a year. So my colleague, who's not on the line, but he would tell me, yes, James, I want a delay, because he's working IVDR and I've got EU MDR. But from my perspective, keep the current timeline, because if you don't, I think people will put this on the back foot. But to do that, I agree, we do need some mitigation measures in place to allow us to continue to put IVDRs on the market, and perhaps be a bit more pragmatic around implementation. I still think, you know, the way that we're approaching it is, you know, it's big bang approach, but really perhaps we want to have a series of bangs for IVDR to allow us to learn and implement it in a probably a pragmatic way. I keep saying pragmatic, but I guess that's the best way of summarizing it.
Great. And Vladimir, your thoughts on the IVDR being potentially postponed?
No, yeah, of course the industry wants more time. No, but it's also, when we look at the kind of questions we receive, we receive 80% questions on MDR, and IVDR remains a smaller concern for industry, because they feel like they have still more time. And I'm afraid that by earning 1 year with the MDR, we lose 1 year for the IVDR. So in that sense, it's a risk we're taking.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. I think we've touched on some really great points today, especially with how COVID is affecting the MDR and the IVDR. Thank you all very much for your time.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.